I nearly died a couple of years ago, shortly after I started doing this work during a surgery that went wrong, and I shouldn't be here. And for me, I really had to think long and hard about, okay, I'm still here, and there's a reason for that. So what is that reason? And as the months went on, it really occurred to me that this is my opportunity to, as much as I love practicing law, and I love practicing law in sports, this is my opportunity to really make, I hope, some sustainable and impactful change.
When was the last time you did a self-assessment on your life and your work? I mean, are you happy with what it is that you're doing? Are you currently questioning whether or not your work is a work of passion that excites you every single day? Well, take a listen to this week's episode of the Spirit Change podcast as we welcome guest Nona Lee of Truth DEI Consulting. After 22 years climbing the corporate ladder of success for the Arizona Diamondbacks, making it to that executive vice president level position and chief legal officer, Nona decides to resign from her position and transition to entrepreneurship. Welcome to the Spirit Change podcast. Oh my goodness, we have Nona Lee in the room. I am super excited just to have this conversation with her, and super excited that she's part of this journey. So Nona, I always start out with the initial question about telling the audience who you are. If you could describe yourself in one word, what word would that be and why?
Well, before I do that, Angela, I just want to say thank you so much for having me here today. I'm just so honored to get to have this conversation with you. If one word to describe me, I would say resilient.
Mm-hmm. Love it. And what makes Nona Lee resilient?
Well, I always keep coming, or I keep going. I bounce back, and you and I have talked a little bit, and I've had many changes in my life, some self-imposed, others, because of circumstances, whatever it is. But, I find my way back to myself and carry on to whatever is next, and trust that, I'm headed in the right direction. And that level of resilience has worked for me time and time again. So that's why I choose the word, because I've been very lucky, I'm always reluctant to use the word blessed, because for some people it's uncomfortable because of religious connotations, but the universe has had my back every step of the way. Let's say that.
Okay, I love that. Nona, I have been following you for quite some time on LinkedIn, and I can't remember how we met, right? But I've watched your journey over the last, I want to say we've been connected for at least the last couple of years, and it's nothing short of amazing, just your career, the growth and expansion in your career, but then also this recent transition. So as we dive into this conversation, I want to open it up with, what is your spirit change moment? And when I describe spirit change, typically for those who haven't heard what spirit change is really one of those moments where it's a life-defining moment. And when we look back over our life, it was that decision that really catapulted us to where we are today. And so, Nona, what's your spirit change moment that you want to discuss today?
Oh my goodness. Well, I would say this most recent change is probably the one that is the most important to me, and that's for a number of reasons. And when I say this most recent change, it was the recognition that although I had an amazing career, 22 years with the Arizona Diamondbacks, working for amazing people, great organization, after I started doing diversity, equity, inclusion internally for the Diamondbacks a couple of years ago, the recognition that, despite my love for my legal work, that it was time for me to pivot to what I believe is my purpose, and focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And part of the reason I say it's my purpose is because I nearly died a couple of years ago, shortly after I started doing this work. during a surgery that went wrong, and I shouldn't be here. And for me, I really had to think long and hard about, okay, I'm still here, and there's a reason for that. So what is that reason? And as the months went on, it really occurred to me that this is my opportunity to, as much as I love practicing law and I love practicing law in sports, this is my opportunity to really make, I hope, some sustainable and impactful change in the DEI space, in the sports world, hopefully, but wherever I can make that change, that is my, I believe, my purpose, and it's certainly my passion.
So Nona, you talked a bit about just the situation that occurred. You share as much or as little of your details as you want, but when you think about the fact that you were in this space where it sounds like close to death, right? You shouldn't have made it, and then something was sparked in you in that moment, to live out a life of purpose. And so I really want to talk to that. And especially when you think about the audience that could potentially be listening, and that person that maybe be in that career that they love, they're growing, but they're not really living that life of purpose. What would you say to them?
I would say that, what we hear so often, but we don't always really internalize it, is that, um, don't wait until the right time to find your purpose and to live it, because we're not promised anything. I mean, I went in for back surgery, and they ended up lacerating a vein and I almost bled out on the table. And you don't expect that. Of course, they always tell you about the risk, but you just think, well, I'll go in for back surgery, I'll be fine. And I had been doing the DEI work for the D-backs at that point, I think about 3 months, maybe 4 months. And you know, the more I thought about it, and I thought about my journey up to that point, and I thought, what, I've had a beautiful career. I've been, like I said, the universe has had my back and has taken very good care of me, but we're at a pivotal time
Mhm.
in our country. Once again, I mean, it's not the first time we've been here. We've been here in different iterations, and I feel like I'm still here because I need to contribute to change now. And I cannot sit back. I'm so proud of our young people.
Mhm.
I love our young people. I mean, and I can't sit back and just watch them do all the work and not do something to help. Because of the career I've had, I have a platform, and arguably, in a position of privilege where maybe I can have some conversations at levels um, that would be meaningful to effectuate change, so that these young people who are working so hard to against hate and divisiveness can have an easier time. If we can change. I know this is like very altruistic, but change some hearts and minds. you
Right.
know uh, because for me, that's what it takes for sustainable change. I mean, I understand the business case, I understand how important that is, and how necessary it is, but for true lasting change, you really need to reach people at a level of empathy that it's difficult sometimes to get people to, because they're not willing to be vulnerable.
Mhm.
And often that's because people don't understand. People don't understand. We talk a lot about Black history and being outlawed in schools, et cetera. And this is, of course, one dimension of diversity, but I choose it because it's the one often most talked about, and certainly since the murder of George Floyd, and before, but the most prevalent, arguably. You know, since that period of time, people were really in that moment moved to change. But then so easily we start to slip back away. And a lot of what has happened is, people were shocked because they didn't know what was happening. They didn't think that what happened to George Floyd really happened.
Right.
But and a lot of this is because people don't understand Black history. They look at someone like me and say, oh, well, things have changed. Look how well she did in her career. She was able to do this. She was, a high level executive in Major League Baseball. But that doesn't mean things have changed.
No.
I am certainly the exception, not the rule.
Right.
And the rule has got to change.
Right. Right.
And that's what I want to work towards.
Yeah, I love that. And even just, reading one of the top executives, right? Black executives, if you would. And so do you, when you think about just effecting change, and even when you talked a bit about how it starts with the heart, right? First of all, I was on your website, so Truth DEI, right? And I love the boldness that you come with. Because I think that so many times when we talk about DEI efforts, it's often watered down in the community. So can you share a little bit about, Truth DEI Consulting, and what is your vision for Truth, if you would?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the vision, which is really to change hearts and minds in the business world, to open up space for people from historically underrepresented communities, to balance things. And part of that, it starts with education. I mean, that's where, I was going and thinking of in response to my last question, is that we don't really understand history. Black history is not taught in schools.
Right.
And if you read about it, people go, oh my God,
Right.
I didn't understand that side of it. And so, what Truth DEI seeks to do is to really help people, understand and own their truth,
Mhm.
about where they are now, about the state of our United States, America, and our world, and what's really happening below the surface that we see every day, or we think we see. What is really the whole picture? Also, significantly help them understand what it is they're willing to commit to change. I mean, what I do understand is that as much as I'd like to believe that everybody's ready for transformative change, that's not the case.
Right.
It's just not. And there are a number of reasons for that. And that's not to say that it's acceptable, because I would love for everybody to just say, okay, we're going to, change and be diverse and inclusive and, have an equitable environment. But, what Truth DI is committed to is providing a safe, non-judgmental space to help people come up with strategies to get to what they're willing to commit to.
Mhm.
Like I said, I will always nudge, if not push, for transformative change, but let's start somewhere.
Mhm.
So where is it that you can start? Because one of the worst things that can happen is for an organization to say, yes, I want to commit to transformative change. And then when it gets uncomfortable, and it always does, because any kind of change is hard, and this is a significant change. So when it gets uncomfortable, they back away.
Right.
And it would have almost been better if you didn't start.
Right. Right.
First of all, that impacts people internally who really were excited that there was going to be change. There's a credibility issue. So it's really about understanding the truth about who you are, what diversity, equity, inclusion really mean, and what you're willing to, really realistically willing to commit to get, in the game and start making some sustainable and impactful changes wherever you have to start with that.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And I think about just the work that I do in change management as well. I don't necessarily focus on DEI per se, but I do a lot of conversations, or facilitate a lot of conversations around psychological safety in the workplace. And so how do you just, break it down to just the basic fact that we're all human, right? And how do you create this space for inclusion, for those that might be different from the majority within the organization, right? And so how do you take them from just this inclusion perspective all the way through innovation? And as you were talking, it made me think about that, because to your point, once you start these efforts on DEI, then you do a detriment to your organization if you stop, if you halt that conversation. And so, so the work that you're doing is extremely important, and, in getting that buy-in from that leadership team, to commit to the process. And I often say that when we're leading out efforts of change, you really have to begin with that whole being comfortable with being uncomfortable through this process, because change in and of itself, people are going to naturally resist it. And so, getting them to come to the table, to have those uncomfortable conversations that will essentially move the organization forward. And so I love how you had encapsulated that. So Nona, when you think about just your spirit change moment, right? So you spent 22 years in this progressive career, and now here you are as this entrepreneur. How do you see that, or what is one of the biggest lessons, or the biggest lessons that you've learned over this time?
Well, I think it's really about priorities,
Mhm.
in that, you hear people say that, money doesn't buy happiness. And, then people always say, well, yeah, the people who have it say that. And I wasn't, wealthy. I mean, I worked for a living, but I made a really nice living. And you know what? That's not the priority. That can't be what's important, because at the end of the day, if I can't do something to help change our world for better, then why am I here?
Right.
Why am I here? It's not just about me, making money and living the good life. And although I enjoy that, don't get me wrong, but but this feeds my soul in a way that I have never experienced in my life. And this is not my first time switching directions or changing because I was following my gut or my passion or whatever it was that was pulling at me at the time. But this is the one that I have peace with, this change in a way that I never had before. I have never thought I'd be an entrepreneur. That wasn't my plan. I'm used to getting that paycheck coming every week, but um, I feel like all of that's okay. It's going to be just fine, because this is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I love it. I love the work. I love the work. I love having the conversations. It's difficult work, and I know you know that, because trying to help people move towards change is so challenging, especially because people have so many excuses why it's not necessary. I mean, I was reading this morning in the New York Times about the replacement theory that everybody's been talking about, and it's just so concerning, and difficult to understand why people feel that by including others they will somehow lose something,
Right.
Or suffer in some way. And it's sad, it's frustrating, especially like I said, you look back at history, and Black history in particular. I will tell you, I was just at the Sports Lawyers Association conference in Atlanta, and there was a DEI panel. We've committed to having a plenary DEI session at every conference going forward, as well as some breakout sessions. And there was a gentleman who spoke on that panel. His name is Dr. Leonard Moore, and he wrote this book, Teaching Black History to White People. And it is phenomenal. And I read it in one day. I was traveling on the plane on the way back from Atlanta, and it's fascinating. And I learned so much that even I didn't know as a Black person. And why is that? Because nobody teaches us, in the detail and in the chronology, and with the level of understanding about what was going on over the course of our time here in America. And you talked about how I'm direct. We can't really, what good does not being direct do?
Right.
I mean, I have a t-shirt I wear that says, I won't be quiet so you can be comfortable.
Right.
I will be kind, but I won't be quiet, because it's not my goal ever to make anyone feel judged, or to make them feel guilty. I don't think anybody needs to feel guilty about anything if they're open to change and if they're treating others with respect and kindness. Then it's really hard to get to this place of hate, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And Nona, you touched a little bit on the replacement theory, right? And so, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the replacement theory is just that idea that if we create this space or open up this space to where other people are either equal or there's a more equitable space, then there isn't enough room for me. You're ultimately pushing me out. If that's not it, then please correct me, or share a little bit more about the replacement theory, because you've probably done a little bit more research than I have.
Well, I mean, to be more direct, it's really the theory and the serious concern of, white supremacists primarily, that immigrants and people of color are trying to come into the country and replace them.
Okay.
So it's essentially what you were saying, but it's really, specific to this particular group of people. And like I said, I think it's sad and it's tragic, especially now that this is still happening, because I think you said it earlier. I mean, there's one race, there is the human race. We created this social construct of identifying people by the color of their skin, and then defined it as race, and built limitations around that.
Yeah.
And define people by that. And we're all people, and some of us, who don't look like what has been the historical majority, our ancestors have been through horrible things and have been treated horribly over the years. And it's still, because of that, there's not equality,
Right.
because they never had the same access and the same opportunities. So we're generationally behind. And so it's not about trying to replace people. It's about trying to be a part of the fabric of this country in the same way as everyone else, and have access to the same opportunities. It's not, it's not necessarily about, it's not about handouts and things. About, give me an opportunity to get the education you have, give me the opportunity to get the job you have, the promotions that you get, etc. And we're just not there yet.
Right.
And a lot of it is, I think, lack of awareness, lack of education, because there are a lot of good people in this world, who I think, if they understood more about why we are where we are, would be more open to and enthusiastically open to systemic and transformative change.
Yeah. As you were sharing, I was thinking about just, you had mentioned earlier, just, the murder of George Floyd. And, even thinking about just how that impacted America, right? And kind of, probably not kind of, it pulled the blinders off in some way for some people. And so, I'm always curious, especially when I talk to other people, and especially as it relates to DEI and education. One of the things that I always kind of resist is this idea of sharing your story, right? We all have a story that, we all have an individual story, whether it relates to discrimination, racism, et cetera, right? And so it's almost like the onus for us as Black Americans to share our experience, so that other people can understand, other races can understand what we've gone through. And I remember I was sitting in a conversation with a group of attorneys, judges, et cetera. And I said, how about we flip that question off of what is my experience as a Black woman, and let's talk about your experience as a white man sitting at your dinner table. To really, how did racism show up in your family, in your world? And that truly made the conversation a bit more uncomfortable, because they weren't ready to necessarily share their experiences or even reflect on those experiences, in this general conversation. I think that for decades, it's been on us to share, but really we have to begin to reflect on all, in all areas, to your point, the fabrics of our society, and see how has it shown up so that we can then break down the systemic issues that exist in us based off of the generations that came before us and what we were taught. What are some of your thoughts around that? Or, have you been in conversations around shifting the lens maybe off of the Black experience onto the white experience?
I've had some of those conversations, but I think you're right. I mean, that doesn't happen often because there's a lot of discomfort. And for me, it's just as important that I understand their journey in this space as it is that they understand mine, because the reason I tell my story and I tell it the way that I did on my website is what we talked about before, right? That people think, oh, if you're successful, none of that stuff happened to you. Well, yeah, all that stuff happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets people's attention in the way that we need them to know this is still happening.
Mm-hmm.
This still happens all the time. And I think it's important to hear it the other way too, because especially in the conversations we're talking about having, because we need to meet each other where we are, right? It's not just about, them meeting where I am, but we need to meet each other where we are. And in order to have a true understanding of each other, we need to understand each other's story and what those experiences were. Because I know some people, especially like I've done a training in New Orleans recently, and some people, particularly in the South, have had a variety of experiences, but often it's been, such that they really don't understand,
Right.
because everything is just so different. So they have that sort of conversation around the table, that many things you would probably wouldn't repeat here.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to maybe the experience of someone from the Northeast or from the West Coast. So, I think it's critical to have those conversations.
You bring up some very good points culturally, just the different demographics and just how we navigate in our own respective areas of the country. And that's so true. I grew up in Illinois for sure. And, it was different than out here. Out here, it's a melting pot. Here it might be more subtle microaggressions versus back, in the South. It's like, what do you want, gal? What are you doing here? And all the way down to that blatant, racism and, some of the even experiencing it as a young youth, I guess, graduation. We had a race riot in our school. Because one set wanted to wear the Black kids wanted to wear African garbs, and the white kids got upset and said, well, we're going to wear our Nazi swastika. They're not the same, right? But when you're in Illinois, the superintendent said it was okay, and so, even navigating that, less than 20 plus years ago. And so, you think about you brought up some very valid points. When you think about just you as a person, Nona, what fuels your passion for DEI work? I know you talked about the youth and helping them out, but when you think about just your own personal journey, you've had a successful career. You essentially made it to the top, but why DEI? Why now?
Because I may have made it to the top,
mm-hmm.
but that doesn't mean that it was easy, mm-hmm. or that there were battles along the way. And it troubles me. I'm very proud to have been, when I resigned at the beginning of April, I was the only Black woman to be an executive vice president out of all 30 major league clubs. I'm pretty sure one of the only gay people, too, openly gay people. Certainly in my organization, I was the only woman to have Black person, LGBTQ plus community member to make it to the executive level of the organization. And that's not okay. I'm proud of those things, but it is not okay. It was challenging because I did not have people who look like me, that I could look up to and who could mentor me through that process. And, I made some mistakes along the way, which I may have made anyway, but some of which could have been avoided if I'd had that sort of mentorship or guidance. And, um, you know, even, I would look around the room and quite often I would be the only woman or person of color in the room, not necessarily internally in our organization, but in our industry, at meetings, et cetera. And that's not okay. Because there are plenty of young people from historically underrepresented communities who want to get into sports. I talk to them all the time. And it's difficult for them to get in. And then when they do, it's often difficult to promote beyond the director level or senior director level. And so that's why I'm driven to do what I do, because at this point in time, that's not okay. We should be so much farther along than we are. And it's not just about, it's about women, it's about people of color, it's about people from the LGBTQ plus community, the disability community, all of it. No one, we should all be judged for, our character and for our skills when we're looking for a job, for our work ethic. We shouldn't, be held back or overlooked or passed over or anything because of our physical attributes. So I just really want to see things change. I want to try to open some doors and for others, because they shouldn't have to be the only or the other.
So Nona, what would you say to that person that it might be the only one in the room, that might be working his or her butt off trying to get to where they want to get to? What would you say to them in this moment?
I would say, if you are pursuing your dream, continue to do so. That wherever it is you want to go, you belong there. There's no reason you should not be there. So don't be dissuaded by the difficulties, but it's also important to be strategic, as we make our way up. I would say find a mentor somewhere, or at the very least, a role model. I mean, someone who you can follow and, read their story and say, okay, I know how they navigated this. Find someone to help you navigate it. Also, it's important to get sponsors as well, because, we need people to open doors for us and speak for us when we're not in the room. So it's really important to do that. So I'd say keep at it, but it is so important that you reach back and do all of those same things, so that you can bring others up behind you and be an advocate for change in your organization. Once you reach a certain level, you're at the table, you have a voice. And so find a way to advocate for change in a way that is not so uncomfortable that it becomes problematic. And, it's important that you have credibility around it as well. And, sometimes people feel it's self-serving, and it's not about that. And so do what you're doing for you, but, keep in mind that people are coming after you. It's the short answer.
I love it. I love it. So Nona, thank you so much. Oh my gosh. So this was just full of nuggets that everybody can take away. But for those who are listening, you've heard it here on the Spirit Change podcast. Wherever you want to go, you belong. Those are the words of Nona. And also she reminds us, be an advocate for the change you want to be, especially when you get to where you're going. And don't forget to reach back for other people in that process to help them to get to where they're going. Nona, thank you so much for being here. It is truly a blessing. So glad to have you.
Thank you, Angela. I enjoyed our conversation.
I appreciate you tuning in to this episode of Spare Change. Be sure to stay connected for future episodes. You can follow me on social media or visit my website at angelargarman.com. Talk to you soon.